This is a story of a person who wanted to become a suicide bomber. This is a story of a person who was robbed of his own childhood. His own childhood was stolen from him. Growing up in Afghanistan, he saw his own home torn apart by wars. He was a vulnerable and sensitive child. He was bullied and he was mocked. Within family, he often faced the anger of his father and those impossible expectations of his father. His father wanted him to become a proper Pakhtun man. With these experiences and these traumas, he ends up in a refugee camp in Pakistan, where extremist ideas were waiting to prey on his insecurities, on his vulnerabilities, and on his aspirations. They promised him a life of dignity, a life of meaning, which he desperately needed and desperately wanted. They deluded him with promises of paradise. And in order to get that life, in order to get that promised paradise, he had to lose only one thing: his own life. This direct conversation takes us through his life journey, through the roots of his pain, and it teaches us about the heavy cost of wars, radicalization, and importantly, childhood traumas.
Sir, I would like to start from a simple question, and I am just curious to know the reason behind writing the book. Do you feel like it's a sort of healing mechanism, sharing your traumas, sharing your experiences with the people?
Firstly, thank you so much, Maz Khan, for inviting me. I'm humble and honored. Well, it's a really good question. It could be a combination of many things. Firstly, in this book, I share with reader uh, what it feels like, to survive 2 years of civil war and then live under constant bombardment. And more than that, this book details my journey from a would-be kind of suicide bomber to becoming a physical therapist in Europe.
Yeah.
And I also share with readers how young lives are being indoctrinated into jihadism and martyrdom, and how childhood traumas and childhood incidents can leave lifelong scars on you into adulthood. So in one way, it's very cathartic. It gives you kind of a psychological relief through expressions of your emotions. As Aristotle said, a life unexamined is not worth living. So basically, you come out of yourself and then you analyze your life. You just follow your journey or your this emotional odyssey. You look at your past, you look at your present, and then you connect the dots. In that way, it is very cathartic. It is healing, but more than that, the message of this book is, as much as I tell people my story, I also show readers the larger geopolitical landscape that brought Afghanistan to the brink of the collapse, and how radicalization was rooted among Pashtuns as a byproduct of anti-Soviet war. So that's the purpose. Yes, in your question, it is very cathartic. It does help you. You see your life from a different angle, and then you become more self-aware. But more than that, it is a message for people as well who are just kind of looking for meaning in the dark places. Had it not been for a certain event, I could have been one of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And I would love to explore these questions with you even further. I think you have dealt with these questions in very beautiful way and in very greater detail in your book. You start your book from your own childhood, and I'm just curious to know, like, quite often we debate why a person become radicalized and why a person become extremist. And when I was reading your book, I was feeling that there was your personal experiences as well, like your relationship with your father, the way you imagined yourself and your childhood, like all these things played a very important role in turning you into what you then call like a suicide bomber. So I would like to know about this, like how the childhood that you lived actually made you vulnerable to these extremist ideas, these extremist ideologies.
Yeah, so it's very important. Thank you so much. That's a really good question. So I would just put, being driven to radicalism, combination of personality, circumstances, environment, and also religious scriptures. To give you a bit of background about my childhood, so I was born into a Pashtun family. I don't know the exact date of my birth, but my mother told me that you came to this miserable world around the time when the Russian invaded Afghanistan. So that's around 1980. And my father was a proud Pashtun man who thought, that Pashtun tribe was superior in Afghanistan to other tribe. And then he named me Maiwand in honor of the Second Anglo-Afghan War. So basically, in fact, Maiwand is the name of a village in Kandahar, Afghanistan, where it had hosted a pivotal battle between Afghan forces and English forces. Malala was a girl. She was an 18 years old girl, a shepherd daughter. She participated in that war, to help the wounded and give water to Afghan soldiers. But then when Afghan forces were retreating, and then she taunted them for cowardice, and then that shamed the Afghan forces, so they continued their resistance. When the Afghan flag bearer was shot down, and then she jumped and hoisted the flag and chanted the songs of bravery, which really inspired Afghan forces to redouble their effort. So as a result, they became victorious. And then, but unfortunately, Manana was shot down herself.
Yes.
But anyway, her bravery and chance led Afghan to a historic history over British forces. Since then, that name, Maiwand, had become synonymous with bravery and honor. And my father always told me that that Maiwand is a heavy name. You have to kind of protect this name, and you have to honor it, and you have to be really brave. But there was a huge gap between my father's expectation and me. I was more of a sensitive kid, more bookish, and I was largely bullied in the streets. Our neighbors were, a lot of them were Tajik and Hazara. They speak different languages, and then they would often call me Afghani Ghul. Afghani Ghul, it's just an ethnic slur, means stupid Pashtun used against the Pashtun. And whenever they beat me, I would come and complain to my father that they are beating me, and my father would beat me further, for not standing up to bullies. One time he told me, next time if anyone bully you, pick a rock there and split their head open with it. They will never bully you again. But so again, I was just struggling all the time with this low self-esteem, and it would really pain me that they were never, the kids never called me my real name, Maiwand, rather than they would call me Afghani Ghul. So I want to claim that name, then carve it on an electricity pole that was in our street. So to claim that, and when I was doing that, the principal bully Ali from Hazara tribe, he came and prevented me to do this. And then I got into an altercation with that. During that altercation, the strip of my trouser got snapped, and then my trouser fell down, and then he could easily pin me down. And then everyone was laughing. Basically, I was just naked there until the shopkeeper came, and then he released me. When I came home, and I was dreading, and I said, if my father find out, and he would just beat the shit out of me. I had only two options, either, to leave the house and just run somewhere, or the next option was to act upon my father's advice to pick a stone. At least, I could erase some of the shame, and then maybe that will lessen his anger. So the next day I picked the rock, and I went there, sat on ambush to just hit Ali on his head. And then Ali with his gang, they all come. When they all came there, again, I got, I don't know, I froze, and I just ran home again, and I couldn't fight back. But then at night, I tossed from side to side, just really feeling guilty, and then suffering from self-lacerating thought the next day. And then I just decided, now I will take the revenge. The next day when I went and I sat on ambush, then the situation changed completely. Rockets and bullets began flying. Everyone, street emptied. I ran home because a war erupted between Hazara and Pashtun forces. So this is the time when the communist regime is collapsed in Afghanistan. The warlord Mujahideen had taken over. And then I remained in the house for about 2 weeks, under constant bombardment. And then we clung to each other out of fear. The rocket would hit next door house, and then it would just fill the debris and dust into our house. Then from there, as you can see, that's my childhood. We just migrated to the countrysides. So Afghan countrysides has been the war zone for the past 10 years in Soviet invasion. Scars and wounds of the Soviet war were everywhere. There was a cemetery there that contains the graves of the people who had been killed during the anti-Soviet war. They would call it Shuhada cemetery, martyred cemetery. Whenever the villager walked past that cemetery, they would just pick a stone and then knock on the gravestone, and then they will shout, congratulations, Shuhada, Islam have become victorious and we have defeated the Russian. I was finding it really intriguing because I was just asking how come, I thought the dead wouldn't hear anything, but they were saying that Shaheeds dwell in Allah's company, they are alive. And then again, I just befriended a guy whose father was buried there. One day when I asked him that whether his father was dead, he got really angry and he said his father is alive. You never call, Shaheed that they are dead. And then there was an Arab graves there, and the villagers said at night it emitted lights. It was a miracle in their eyes. So, one night from my uncle's rooftop, I gazed at that grave. I don't know whether it's hallucination or something. I did see flickers of green lights. So those ideas really captured my mind. My fascination grew, with the kind of martyrdom and shahadat. And then what happened there was a short ceasefire, and then my brother and me, we went back to Kabul to see my father and disabled sister who were left behind. We stayed in Kabul for about 2 months, and then that ceasefire broke and we were stranded. I remained stranded for 2 years in the midst of the war. And then eventually my brother disappeared as well. During the war, I've seen the best and the worst of humanity. What I've seen, I wouldn't want any child to see that. So I have depicted all in this book. To cut a long story short there, so that's my childhood. That's where I was 14 years of age. In 1994, we migrated to a refugee camp, Shamshed, to Peshawar. So this is one of those 150 camps that were built for Afghan refugees, 3 million Afghan refugees who had fled the anti-Soviet war. That's where, it was just imbued with excessive religious fervor. This was basically, those refugee camps were stayed within the states. There was Sharia law, and everyone was a freelancer mullah, everyone was a preacher. And that's where, I got admission into madrasa. So, and I found meaning and a purpose in life as well. It just gave me a bit of comfort to be enrolled in that madrasa. So this is, as you can see, the combination of my past life and then this environment that was just really, and there was a lot of myths around Shaheed as well in that refugee camp. So that drove me a lot to be more of a radical, into radical Islam.
Yeah, do you, like, you touched upon many important points, like your personal life and how that personal life intertwined then with the political situation at the time in Afghanistan and then Pakistan. I'm again curious to know, like, do you feel that these forces and also like the personal situation, they they have stolen something which is very important, which is very precious to everyone, I think, your childhood. And I'm
Yeah.
just curious to know, like, there are still a lot of refugees children, even I think the refugees are increasing because of these wars that are still being waged in this world. Like, do you feel that they have actually stolen that thing from you, your own childhood, these forces that were there
Well,
around you?
definitely. It just basically because when I was in the midst of war, I was deprived of education for 2.5 years. And also you live in constant fear. You always live on edge. You think the next rocket would come and fall on your head. And then when my brother disappeared, it was really traumatic. I didn't know whether was he alive or was he dead. But then again, you have to know that, as you say, those political forces, probably you told me you study political science, yeah?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. So you know that a lot better probably than me. So look, those refugee camps, they were just, as I told you before, they were just propped up against the Soviet invasion at that time. Like Steve Cole in his book, The Ghost War, he writes, prior to Soviet invasion, there were only 700 madrasas in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. They only taught more of devotional matters in terms of religion. By the time when Russia were leaving, they turned mushroom to 35,000 madrasas.
Mm-hmm.
So, and at that time, a million was spent, they were funded from Gulf Arab states, and even America itself, they paid million to Nebraska in order to inoculate Afghan youth against Soviet insurgency. You would just, kids as young as 4 or 5, they would learn their alphabet in line. For example, A stand for Ahmad, J stand for Jihad, G stand for Gan, Ahmad does jihad and kill infidels. So they were really indoctrinated. It was very useful because there were, then the America or maybe the West wanted to stop the Soviet drive toward the Persian Gulf or warm oceans, Indian Oceans. So it was their strategy in order to kind of prevent that. But then when the Civil War occurred, that was their proxies. And in that stage, Afghanistan was completely abandoned. So it does play a lot of the time, this political situation. But again, you have to look it up as well. There is theology as well. But when that theology comes into action, that's the question and how it just works.
Yes, and we will like definitely come to this question of theology as well. So if I could just once again recap, like we have a person who had these traumatic experiences in childhood, and now that person comes to these refugee camps in Peshawar, where he is seeing these mullah. You used a word like these freelancers mullah. What kind of Islam did you find there, and were you like surprised to see this kind of interpretation of Islam there in these refugees camp? Or you were just like fascinated by it?
It was just a complete cultural shock there. When I came there, I was thinking, and then I had even developed some hatred toward my father that I was feeling really bad that why I have been deprived of this type of educations. Basically, the women were covered from head to toe. They couldn't travel without muharram. And also, anytime you move here and there, somebody would hit you with a hadith or a Quranic verse. There was a culture of jihad and martyrdom. It's just the camp was just really like imbued with intense religious fervor there. And then you would hear a lot of myths about shahadat, martyrdom. And then you would often hear such and such person saw a shaheed, unburied a shaheed 4 years after his death, and his body was intact and smelled of fresh. There were a lot of myths there that the plane were coming and informing Mujahideen before the Russian attack, or Scorpion attacked the communists, or maybe dog were eating communists or Russians' bodies, but they were not touching shaheeds' bodies. But then again, you go to madrasa as well. It was not only in the street and in the mosque you hear this, you go to madrasa as well. So there are verses of the Quran that clearly say that shaheeds remains alive. It receives sustenance from their Lord, or God has purchased from the believer their body and their properties in exchange for Jannah. They fight in the cause of Allah. They are killed and they kill other. So I mean, like that doesn't mean. So there are some verses from Quran, and then around those verses of Quran, there is a lot of myths making as well. So when you're constantly hearing those, it's just you. In terms of neurolinguistic programming, even if it's a lie there, you think it's the truth. So it was a completely. But the other thing is the surprising. Probably the Pakistan government had no influence in those refugee camps there. So there were people like Enzibat, we would call it. They had their own security. They had their Department of Welfare. They had their Department of Martyrdom. They had their own securities. So the only school available were a lot of madrasas. So I would wake up early in the morning. I will just do my morning prayer, and then I will read Quran, and then I will do Ishraq Salah, and then I'll go to madrasa, and then I would just from madrasa, come back home and have some food, and then I will just go to Darul Hifaz when I do where I memorize the Quran. And then after that, there were nights, I would just do Salat Tasbih till morning, and I would be just crying and ecstatic and just feeling really, really as if this world was just nothing, and there was better life somewhere else. That was my main aim in meaning to go there.
Yeah. When I was reading your book, actually, I had found three things in your book. It is very funny, like the stories that you described. There was something funny as well, and I would like to tell you this as well. This is also very frightening as well, like the stories that you were documenting, and extremely saddening as well. And I'm saying saddening because quite often we think about these things like in geopolitical terms, and like let's rescue Islam and let's fight some war for our national interest, and we do not think like the cost of these things on persons like you who like live those experiences. And I think you very clearly captured this in your book. And now I want to ask this question. You start your book by saying that I wanted to become a suicide bomber. Now, when you were in these refugee camps, do you feel that these mullahs and the sort of culture that was produced in those refugees camp, they wanted everyone to become a potential suicide bombers, or like there was something different, like a different space was created for specific people who would want to become or who will be made these suicide bombers?
So it's just because, when you are constantly preach that the highest honor in Islam is to achieve martyrdom, and when the first drop of your blood, your all sin will be forgiven, and you will be given the best place in paradise. And then if you're a firm believer, so that's your goal. You want to, you are living in an environment riddled with abject poverty, no woman, you have nothing. And then there is a promise of a blissful afterlife. As Plato said, if you want to make good warrior, you have to give him the promise of a blissful
Yes.
afterlife. Many of my classmates, the friends that are around, I don't have firm statistic, around maybe more than or less than 200 lads from that refugee camp would just commit suicide attacks against NATO forces in Afghanistan. So it's just more that mentality and ideology. Had it not been for certain events, the purpose of this book is that I could have been one of them.
Mhm.
So it is the combination of your personality. I mean, everybody won't do that. So maybe the person like me, when I see myself, I was very vulnerable. I would have done this really easily. But then again, there one story of a guy that I've changed his name, Babek. He had more of this feminine feature, and he was really kind of laughed at. And a lot of the people were calling him Qamargola. Every time he laughed, he would just hold his hands against his mouth. But he was a nice guy. And then he went to Kashmir for a while to see training with Lashkar-e-Taiba and all those. And then eventually I heard in 2008 that he was trying to kind of attack in a suicide manner an American Jeep, but then he blew himself and other civilian with himself as well. I mean, inherently, he was not a bad person. He was a
Yes.
very good guy. But I think he was just a victim of bad indoctrination and bad circumstances.
Yeah, but there was something else as well in that indoctrination, which is like you also said this now, and you also say this in your book that it gave you meaning. For example, you say in your book that after years of humiliation and rejection, I finally found something to live for. Like when you were
Yeah, that,
listening to that mullah who was speaking about martyrdom and who was speaking about rejecting the world, you said that I found some meaning in this to live for.
that's really definitely the good way you're saying that. You do find a meaning. You think you're just spiritual James Bond.
Mhm.
You're something important. You want to, save the humanity. You're something that you live for. You're no longer that Afghani ghul. Even when I went back to my cousins in 1996, when I had gun on my shoulder and then I had this turban, I felt that as if earth was under my feet. And because I always struggle with masculinity and I always struggled with a low self-esteem, but I now have had something to live for, and I felt important and significant as well. So in that way, I mean, like it's really, really influential that you feel that give you the sense of importance, the sense of meaning that you're living for something. You are just nobody. You're not, you know, as you were told that you are nobody. Yeah.
Yeah. And when I was reading that book and those sermons, I was feeling that there are certain the sort of those Viking stories. They would say like, do this for God and reject this word and let's please the God, and you will be there in paradise with your friends drinking wine, and you will be with hurrahs. And I remember this story because I was reading your book on the side of sea, and when I read this, that when these mullahs would speak about heroes, you will, even though you are sitting in that majlis in with these mullahs in madrasa, you will feel like very sexual in that environment, like the stories that they tell the people. And I just burst into a laughter on the seaside when I read this section of the book.
Yeah, that's what it is. They're glorifying that paradise, and then they talk about houris, the beautiful, that they are 1,000 times more beautiful than the girls of this world, and you can have sex with them all day long. And then I depict in that book that's just had an unwanted direction there. When you think of that, if you don't have nothing here and there is just the beautiful girls, there is enough foods as well. What are you doing living here? So the only thing remains between you and your other life, that paradise is your life that you could really easily stomp it, you know, with attaining martyrdom. Even when I went back in 1996, there, whenever I walked past that martyred cemetery, I had that ecstatic precognition that somehow I will be a martyr. And then one night I dreamt that I was in this gold inlet paradise with beautiful houris. When I woke up from the dream, I was in intense euphoria. You know, I thought, you know, as if I had won a lottery. The only thing between me and that life was just my life that I could really stamp it out. That's why I told my cousin that I wanted to go to Shumali. At that time, the war was against Ahmad Shah Massoud.
Mhm.
My main aim was subconsciously to attain martyrdom there. And even though I had doubt at that time whether I would be considered as shaheed, because the war was not against the pure infidels. And then I asked Mullah, and then he said, yes, no, why not? Because we are just fighting for elevation of God's words. Because he read a verse from Quran, those who do not rule the government by the orders and mandates from Allah, they are just not Muslims. So we were just fighting for Sharia and elevation of God's word. But then when I asked my cousin, and then he just said that you can't fire really well, you could be killed, and then your father could just hold me accountable. But then I had still argument with them, and I said I'm going to go directly to Maidan Shah, to Mullah Nurullah Nuri, and then get attached with one of the battalion. As I was battling with him, then my father came from Shamshatu, and then he had a quarrel with my cousin that he was indoctrinating me. I didn't want to escalate the fights, so that's why. And then I left back with my father, went to Shamshatu, and then I fled home and went to join Haqqaniya Madrasa in
Mhm.
Akora Khatek. As Haqqaniya Madrasa is one of the biggest endorsers of the Taliban. Usually in the summer months when they were off there, they would send a student for jihad. But then the admission was filled for that year. I put my name for the next year. And then again, I just fled home. Then I went to Kabul to join the Taliban. And on the route, you know, several incidents took place that really kind of changed my attitude toward the Taliban.
Mhm.
So a lot of the time they would ask us to pray several times. One time I confronted one of them, and then he was very abusive, and it didn't resonate well with me. When I went to this Kabul stadium, and then I saw execution ceremonies, chopping the hands, and then shooting people. This something, you know. I'm naturally a very kind of empathic person, so I closed my eyes. It didn't resonate well with me. And then again, when I was traveling to village from Kabul, my hat was blown away by wind, and then some of them there just was telling me that why don't I wear the hat, and because it was un-Islamic. Uh, and then at that time in 1997, rumor had circled that the Taliban were being backed by the Pakistan, but I knew at that time that Pakistan government was secular. Constitution was not Sharia based. So I developed a few doubts whether, if I attain martyrdom in cause of the Taliban, whether I would be considered a real shaheed or not. So it's just I depict my whole emotional journey in this book. What drove me away from Taliban, and then eventually the critical thinking when I was exposed in that secular school to more of science that eroded my faith in Islam as well.
Yeah, I will. I would love to talk about this point as well, but I want to know from you on this question something. I was just listening to you, and I just felt like we all know this, but these people, these religious people who wanted you to become like a suicide bomber, these extremists making factories, they were very skillfully playing with the grievances of the people. Like, if one could just look at your story, you saw all those things in your childhood. You lost your brother like when he was kidnapped, and that experiences. So they also know that there are people, these people in front of us, they are like very poor people, so they would say that when you go to paradise there will be no hunger. And they also play on this sexual deprivation, so they play on this sexual deprivation and they play on these grievances, and they tell us that everything that you lack here you will be met with in paradise. And that is how they make these suicide bombers and these extremists, by playing with our grievances and by playing with our sort of insecurities.
That's you said that well. Yeah, that's why I've named this book "Delusions of Paradise." They basically sell you delusions, and they can really, really prey upon your shortcomings or the things that you don't have when you're just living in an environment riddled with extreme poverty, no woman, no food, no purpose, and then the other world is made for you and preached to you as a glorious, a beautiful place.
Yes.
Uh, you have nothing to do here. It's just the sooner you get there, the better it is to get rid of all this misery and guilt that you're suffering from.
Yeah.
So that's basically, but again, there are, I mean, like they supplement that with theology. If you're really
Yes.
a believer in the Quran, so they draw conclusions, they draw verses from the Quran. But
Yes.
again, if you ask moderate Muslim, they might probably will tell you, well, it is said in the Quran, the verse were just referring to a metaphorical situation or something not in a physical realm. But those stories that are really, because in Afghanistan, a lot of the time, you would hear there are a lot of myths around martyred. Now, a lot of people claim that they had seen Shahid's body 10 years or 20 years after they were buried, and their body was intact. It was just, it was not decomposed. So those type of myths were really around that. When you hear those myths, and then you combine that with the religious scriptures, and then you have this, as you said, uh, hunger and also anger, and then you're just sexually repressed as well. So they all join together, and then and if your personality is really vulnerable, and when the opportunity comes there, and then you grab it, and then you say, like, okay, I'm just making a flight from this world, and there is a better world, be it even if I kill a few people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think quite a few times you mentioned this theology, that there is a theology behind all these sorts of things. I think there is certain validity in your argument, because when we look back at history, these religious people who still dominate our society, they were very active in doing all these things like with the people, and they didn't question, for example, Taliban till now. So like, is it like, could it be because they were also believing in that theology, that they were in support of these people who were making these suicide bombers, these extremists. And that is why this idea of that theology has nothing to do with it, or religion has nothing to do with it, you think this is questionable?
Well, I think, even if it's mythology, it has to stem from somewhere, that mythology. In the book, I have mentioned, even from the beginning, and I said Plato, the notion of martyrdom, enjoying a blissful afterlife, is as ancient as hell. Even Plato himself said that if you want to make good warrior, you have to give him the promise of a blissful afterlife. Even in Bible as well, it says that when the Crusaders were fighting as well, they were just given this notion of a blissful afterlife. There is a verse in Bible and said with the martyred would be alive, and they will be having white clothes, and they will be aware, what's happening in the world. So it's same like we have verses in the Quran. It says there, وَلَا تَقُولُوا لِمَنْ يُقْتَلُ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتًا بَلْ أَحْيَاءٌ وَلَكِنْ لَا تَشْعُرُونَ. Those who give life in the way of God, they are not dead, they are alive, but you don't understand it. So, and then a lot of other verses as well, that another verse, it says that those who die in the cause of Allah are alive, and they're receiving sustaining food with their Lord, but you don't understand it. And I probably mentioned that earlier as well. Another verse, they said God has purchased from the believer their life and their properties in exchange for Jannah, and they fight in the cause of Allah. They kill and they're being killed. So these are all the verses. I mean, then the mythology that comes around that is just it's just taken from that. But again, I'm not this type of person, Islamophobic. I would say that my thinking is Islam can be religion of peace, and it can be religion of violence. It all depends on how do you draw conclusion and how you interpret the verses. But to deny there that it has nothing to do with theology, this is a bit injustice. You are ignoring the problem in itself. So there is some theology behind it, but then circumstances and also the situation and personality type also play a role in that. Yeah.
You quite often refer to yourself in your book like a coward when you were a child or when you were a boy. Now I see like a sort of strength within you because you could question all those things that were taught to you and that you experienced. And you also had this courage then to share your stories with the people. So I want to understand, like, when was the time when you started to question all these things that were taught to you, the very ideology? When was the specific point?
The specific point was, to be honest, I was involved I was about 40 years of age, and I was involved in an accident that a car, I was cycling from Holland to Germany, and then I was hit by a car, and then I woke in hospital after 5 hours of being unconscious. And then after that, my knee got damaged as well. And then one day I had a religious argument with a Pashtun boy in a Pashtun gathering. And then he cursed me, and then he jumped to attack me. I backed down to fight him because I was fearful of my knee there. I thought I wouldn't be able to handle him. And then the other lads, they really taunted me for that. So that taunt really ripped up so many ancient wounds there. It just woke my Pashtun mind from slumbers. Because for Pashtun, the line between life and death is just honor. As Pashtun could kill each other with mere taunts there. And then I thought, now I will be seen as coward. And then I really questioned my irrational obsession with that. There was a war took place between my Pashtun mind and more of this rational Western mind. One time I would say, you're not defined by someone else insulting you. Then other time I would remember my father telling me that next time anyone bully you, you have to pick a rock and then just split their head open with it. That, to be honest, really plunged me into deep depression. And then I questioned all that my irrational obsessions with revenge and why I was being so affected when they called me a coward. And then when I realized I knew there a lot of those voices came from my childhood. And then I went back, traveled in 2019 to Kabul. And then at least if I could meet Ali, I didn't meet Ali because I heard that he had become addicted to drugs. But then I went to meet the scene of the crime, that electricity pole, because I had developed even a phobia after, what happened to me. I couldn't look at it. And then I looked at that. And then at the same time, I had conversation with a lot of the Taliban and my cousins. When I was talking to them, I knew how brainwashed they were, and just I realized had it not been for certain event, I could have been thinking like them now. Then I thought the best way would be for me to share this with world. At least I could prevent some other people, and also it had a cathartic effects on my psychology as well, because I was not now blaming myself. I knew the reason as well, and then I just really went into this way of forgiveness and accepting yourself for who you are, because
Yeah.
I was always in war with myself,
Yeah.
because I always looked down on myself. Something was ingrained in childhood that I was not good and I was not a coward, and I always wanted, to appear stronger.
And you also went to, I think, Afghanistan once, because you wanted to prove yourself again. Like you wanted, like that feeling that you had felt when you had a gun with yourself. You wanted to feel that again, and you went to Afghanistan. Now, like when you were changing, do you feel that it had something to do with your experiences with these Taliban in Afghanistan? Like you felt this is so repulsive, or you thought that, like, were you more influenced for them when you encountered them in Afghanistan, or they were repulsive so much that you questioned the very ideology, your very thoughts about them and Islam?
So initially, but that second journey that I mentioned there, that is after when in 2019, I went from Europe to
Hmm.
Afghanistan.
Yes.
The second that I just
Yeah.
mentioned. And if you're just going back to the period when I was in Taliban in 1996, when the Taliban took over Kabul, I went and traveled there. But at that time, we saw the Taliban as justice warrior, as people, who would bring the peace. So
Hmm.
you have to really know how the Taliban emerged. The Taliban emerged as a result of the civil war between the warlords. And there was a lot of mythology around the Taliban. Some people said that bullet wouldn't pierce their bodies. They were just a God-driven army. Some said, hey, this is a mythical army of Imam Mahdi.
Hmm.
So when I went back to kind of Maidan Shar, it's just my native village. My cousin were already fighting for the Taliban. They were just controlling Commander Amanullah's garrison. So I took gun with them, and then I began patrolling, and then learned how to shoot. That's where my fascination grew, and I wanted to be deployed to North, to attain martyrdom. And then when I came back from there, as I told you before, that my father came and had a quarrel with my cousin. When I went, and then I fled home, and then I couldn't get admission in Konya. I went back, and then I had different experiences. Came back to the Shamshat refugee camp. At that time, our day shut its door, and I was waiting for the next year for Haqqaniya.
Yeah.
And then I began taking a lesson from another mullah. He had a bit of moderate views. He was saying the Taliban were just fighting for Pakistan. They were not fighting for Allah's words. That put a lot of doubt in my mind. And
Hmm.
then my father was really hounding me that I have to do something with my life. To keep him shut, I got admission in Peshawar in that new school. That the boys in Peshawar, they shave their beard, they watch movies, they went to snookers. Initially, I didn't like them, and I just tried to preach them Islam. But over time, I got used to them, and I began enjoying their companies.
Hmm.
When then the next year came for Haqqaniya, I didn't bother to go back there, because that fascination, that love that I had for the Taliban, I had lost that.
Hmm.
And then over time, when I was in that secular school, a lot of doubt began questioning my faith and a lot of the things that I have learned in the past. So basically, at one stage, I was two world. Peshawar was more of world. I know the distance in Shamshat refugee camp is only 25 kilometers. But then, in essence, those two places were centuries apart.
Hmm.
Shamshat refugee, the mat camp, as much as its structures were anchored to 7th Saudi Arabia. So was the People's Mint. They are there. A lot of those my previous friends. They lived in 6th century Saudi Arabia. And we, even when I was at the beginning in the refugee camp, when we were in Halaqa and Madrasa, I was thinking we were just in the midst of war with the Jewish and Christians, and that Jerusalem was next door village that the Crusader had invaded. So ideally, you're constantly being drummed into ear those hadiths. You hear, you think you're not just in the midst of the war. But then when I went to Peshawar, those lads, they didn't care about, jihad or anything like that. They only enjoyed their life. So I had this two circle of friends. One circle of friend thought the guys in Peshawar were going to hell, and the other thought, that they were already in the hell. So
Yeah.
in that regard, that's just the past, the transitioning. And then over time, I questioned, when then I was exposed to science, I questioned a lot of my faith as well at that time. And then eventually, when September 11 occurred, some of the lads whom I used to hang around in Madrasa and Halaqa, they attacked a Pakistani police checkpoint just at the entrance to Shamshatu. Have you ever been to Shamshatu? They broke Qaeda Azam's picture and all the furnitures and even smashed it to pieces. I went there only to watch there. The next day, the rumors swelled that the Pakistan ISIS was looking for people involved in that attack. But at that time, America was a wounded bear. They were just looking anyone with slight excuses to catch them. And then we'll connect them to Al Qaeda. And then I had quarrel with my father, and then I left the house. So, but eventually I ended up in the UK, and then I lived in the UK. My asylum application was refused. I lived in hiding for about 2 years. From there, I went to Ireland. In Ireland as well, my asylum application was refused. I lived for 3 years in asylum seeker hostel, where I was not allowed to work, study, and have visitor. And then I married an Irish woman, and then I had a degree. I got a degree, studied a degree in physical therapy. After obtaining that degree, then I got job again back with the UK military forces in the UK, and then I had an accident. That's where in 2019 I went back to Afghanistan to just for some emotional resolve.
Yeah, you have, I think you have like in your life, if I can use the word, you have experienced so much cultural shocks, like the word that you had used earlier, like from that refugee camps to Peshawar, and then from Peshawar to the West, and moving around these different countries. So, do you like, there is quite often a debate here in the West that here in Pakistan, we also say that there is racism toward these immigrants and people don't like them. What do you feel about it personally? Like, do you see the situation has changed for you?
Well, yeah, racism is it is here racism, but then you have to look at it like that. When two cultures are markedly different, the conflicts are bound to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I am not going to be one of those moany guy, oh, they are racist or anything like that. I have to some extent. I'm not falling to that right-wing rhetoric as well. I'm not a Islamophobe, or
Uh-huh.
they don't like you, no matter if you're Muslim or not, if you're brown. But then there are some of our people, they come, they completely seclude themselves. They don't integrate into society.
Yeah.
That's when, the British or the native people become a bit suspicious. Racism, to be honest, is everywhere. I mean, we had racism in Afghanistan as well. That's why there was civil
Yes.
war. In Pakistan, with all due respect, I do respect Pakistan. I have a lot of admiration and respect for Pakistan. But then a lot of the time now, you see a lot of people are born there and they're just being kicked out from there. So, which is in itself is unfair, because if you're
Yes.
born there, you have this birthright. Even if you go to Iran, like Afghanistan, not allowed to have educations in their
Yes.
former schools.
Bilkul.
Similarly, if you go to Saudi Arabia as well, you live there for 30, 40 years, they won't give you any residency.
Yes.
So that's part of life. And the natives are just, the right wing is getting stronger and stronger with each passing day, which is really disturbing. But with the refugees at this stage, we have to prevent the crisis of refugee from happening, then dealing with the problem of refugee here.
Yes.
Then they have to really criticize their intervention. For example, yes, Russia came there. They used Afghan religiosity in their blood against the Russian. The Russian were defeated, and those Mujahideen were their proxy. They could have intervened in Afghanistan at that time. And then the Taliban came to power. Taliban is nothing new there. They are the extension of that culture of
Yeah.
jihadism and martyrdom that was propped up against the Russian invasion.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned this problem of refugee, and I think we talked a bit about it earlier as well. When you see these refugees now, what do you feel? Like, do you feel that they could also be somehow mistreated or used in this very nasty way, if I can use the word, by these forces which can benefit from them?
Definitely, definitely. My heart goes out to them. You know, there are a lot of them are victim of politics, as Henry Ford said. Just give me who profits from war, and I'll just tell you how to stop it. There are a lot of stakeholders. There is a lot of industrial military complex that they profit from that. But then ordinary people suffer. There are a lot of them are kids and children. And then you go somewhere new. It's just a completely cultural shock. My
Mhm.
life have been always, on run, and I know how it feels like. And I fully sympathize with those people. But the main thing is we have to kind of do some self-auditing. We start from within, bring some changes rather than blaming this and that. We have really I would say, this habit of always blaming other, and then without paying attention to ourselves, to our own problems.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah,
so it is heartbreaking, and it's just it breaks my heart to them. I always feel their pain, but that's life. Life is just unfair, and
yeah,
it's what to do about it. I wish I could have done something, but just
yeah,
it's just
yeah. Now, I want
yeah.
to ask this last question because Pakistan still faces this problem of extremism, terrorism. Do you feel that we can counter this thing called extremism without countering faith? Like, is it possible to not be extremist without doing away with your faith?
That's a really, really good question. That's really important. So we have to really look at first what is faith and the notion of God, because firstly, I mean, like the notion of God gives you hope there. We are weak, we are all going to die there. It's always for some people appealing to have a hope that there is afterlife. And then it gives you also a psychological safeguard against unknown, because they just easily tell you where you came from and what's the purpose of life, where you're heading to. And more than that, it builds a community, and then it becomes a part of a culture as well, and an identity for a lot of people
Yeah.
as well. So I certainly see the potential in Islam for reform, because Islam is not a monolithic religion,
Hmm.
and a lot of the Islam that, for example, the radical mullah preaches is the culmination of 250 years. So you have Quran, you have Meccan period, and you have Medina period, and then you have Hadith. Usually some of the Hadiths contradict the Quran, and then you have fiqh, and then you have so many other sects as well. Uh, in that way, in order for Islam, there has to be kind of mujtahid, those people who use their independent reasonings to study the text as well. There has to be a revision there. They have to they make it more adaptable. The curriculum that are taught in those madrasa, they're really medieval. It needs to be made more compatible with the modern world. I think rationality should proceed over literalism. A lot of the people are literalists. For example, like chopping hands for theft. I mean, at that time, if you look at the 7th or 8th century Saudi Arabia, imprisonment would have been impossible. You can't just imprison 10,000 people. So the only method that they had to prevent people from robbery was to cut thieves' hands.
Hmm.
But nowadays we have other means that you can utilize it. So in a similar fashion, because the problem is there are one type of people, we will call it really Islamophobe, because they judge Islam by the modern standard. Oh, why there is kind of slavery? Why concubine? You can capture your enemy's wife, like take it as a concubine.
Yes.
Uh, and then there are like Taliban and ISIS or extremists. They think, those values that were really practical in 7th century or 8th century Saudi Arabia can be implemented now. So I think there has to be a hard step taken in order to prevent that radicalization. The main thing is because a lot of people, our Pashtuns are poor, even from Afghanistan.
Yes.
They have many kids, so they go to madrasas in order to have a shelters and 3 time foods in their bellies. And they're being drummed into their ears those extremist ideologies. By the time they graduate, either they are picking the gun or either they become mullah. When they become mullah as well, so what they're doing is they're preaching their extremist idea to the general public, or they have their own madrasas. So in that regard, that's why Afghanistan and Pakistan is becoming more and more radicalized as well. And usually when there is external force as well to change people, people are prone to become more radicalized. I think change is good, but in small doses, it has to come from within the
Within
society.
the society.
I
Yes.
think all religion evolve, like all religion. I think Islam can evolve as well and can reform there. I'm just a firm believer in that.
Yeah. So thank you so much, sir. We will talk once again as well, I think. And I personally felt a lot like when I was reading your book, there was something personal as well. Like I'm also a Pakhtuns, and we have also seen the
Yeah.
situation somehow here in Swat as well. And now the situation in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is also not very good. And I also learned a lot from you now when we were talking, and we will definitely talk once again as well. Thank you so much. And if you think there is anything left, like I didn't ask about those things and you think they are important, so I would love if you share those things with us.
No problem. Firstly, thank you so much. You're doing a great job. Sorry, probably a little bit I went jump here and there. It's just a long history. But other than that, the main thing is I think we should promote scientific literacy. We should promote critical thinking. I think sovereignty of reasons. And evidence of, I'm not saying like evidence of senses like is the be and ends all, but it's really important to be more pragmatic. I think we have to have a counter narrative, because when you go to madrasa, you're being taught that Muslims are superior to non-Muslims. Islam should dominate the world. We shouldn't have friendship with Jews and Christians. And then once we kind of have a khilafah or an Islamic government, we will become prosperous. But I think a lot of these are just you're just selling a delusion to people. From 19th century, when Ottoman empires or khilafah collapsed there, Muslim, they counteract colonialism with going back to scriptures every time. They think, if you're like Sahaba, then we will become more victorious, because Sahaba drank from the fountain of Quran and Sunnah. That's why they defeated the Persian, they defeated the Roman. But I think we have to get out of that mentality. We have to see, we don't see the values like Western values, it's human values. We should we promote science and critical thinking. These are my main aim is there. I'm not judging people or I'm not criticizing people. I leave the decision to the reader to read this book and decide for themselves whichever route to choose. Thank you so much. I highly appreciate that. Anytime that you want me to speak with you again in Urdu, in Pashto, you're more than welcome. Thank you
Yeah,
so
thank
much.
you so much, sir. And I love the word you used, sovereignty of reasons. I think we are perfectly in agreement on this. We should like give that sovereignty to reason in order to have a different society which is more humanistic, which is more empathetic, if I can use the word. So thank you so much, sir.